Oh, great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Hannah. I'm a compulsive overeater. Um, thanks very much for inviting me today, and apologies that I'm coming to you a wee bit flustered. Um, I always struggle to know where to start with shares. But I suppose the best thing is just to start on what life was like before OA. Um, I don't really remember a time in my life where food and my body wasn't part of the narrative of my life. It was, I was a chubby kid, I was an overweight teenager, I was obese at university, and I was kind of morbidly obese before I came into OA. Um, it was just kind of always there. It was something that I didn't realize until later on that my family used to talk about behind my back. It was something they were all worried about. Um, and actually, I come from a dynasty of compulsive overeaters. I come from a long line of people, women predominantly, who have problems with food, who have problems with body image. And for as long as I can remember, I soothed myself orally. I mean, it was a family joke that I was born, and the very first thing that I did was start sucking my two fingers. And I very quickly progressed to sucking my thumb, and it was from the start. I soothed myself via my mouth, and I it was just kind of always something I did because for a really long time it worked, and I was really grateful when the big book talked about that. It's like, the alcoholic drink because he likes the effect. It's like, yeah, I ate because I like the effect. It did what it needed to do for a really long time. It numbed me out. It helped me cope when life and everything was all just too much. Food was there, and I don't know why, but I have had a belief since I was very young that I'm just not good enough. I mean, I remember being probably about 6, 7 years old, and I genuinely believed that some people shouldn't be allowed to have children because I believe someone should have prevented my mum and dad from having me. Like I shouldn't be here. I am a broken human, and someone should have prevented me from being thrust upon the world because this is just all terrible. And I don't know where that came from, but the food was there. And then, as I now know, this is a progressive illness, and slowly but surely, the food was not only my perception of the solution; it was also part of the problem. I didn't realize that for a really long time. I didn't notice that food was the problem. I thought the problem was my weight for a long time, but not the food. They were two different things. And so, having kind of gone through, my childhood and my teenage years being the biggest one in the room, that carried on. And the effect of food slowly started wearing off. Um, and I always sort of said, like that kind of the cost benefit, at some point it tipped the balance. And at some point I knew that actually I'm not really getting anything from the food anymore. This isn't fun. I'm not being numbed out to the extent that I used to be. I'm not feeling soothed the way I used to be. But by this point, and the cost is so high to me in all aspects, but by this point I'm gone. Like I'm too far in, I'm too deep. And you know, denial was such a powerful way to cope with that. My illness is absolutely one of denial. And I know that for some people, there's that kind of overthinking, compulsiveness, that kind of getting on the scale, stepping off, getting on, getting off. That was never my journey because I would much rather live in denial. I'd much rather never weigh myself. I'd much rather pretend I didn't have a problem. Um, I remember like on my lunch break at work, I'd go to the supermarket, buy my lunch, and there'd be like a bag of something. And in my head, I'd say, oh, I'll buy that for the office. Like, that's the lie. And as I reached to grab it and put it in my basket, I know I'm not sharing it with anyone in the office. I know that. I absolutely know that with 100% certainty. But it was a lie I had to tell myself in order to justify picking it up at the beginning because it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to buy a bag of these things and keep them in my drawer and eat one and try and make it look like it was the same one I was eating the whole time. Like it was just bizarre behavior. And I couldn't explain it. I couldn't rationalize it. And, the more this illness progressed, the crazier these behaviors became. You know, I told the world I was a vegetarian but used to binge on meat. Why? No one would have cared. Um, and my theory, I used to go to Subways and get a meat in a sandwich because my theory was is that Subways all smelt the same. So I could take it back to the office and eat it in front of everyone and no one would know I was eating meat. Weird. I would eat food until the point I was in physical pain and discomfort. Why? And I mean, pizzas was one of my big binge foods, and I used to get two of the largest pizzas they did, and to the point where like it would be that kind of trying to finish that final few bites. It's like, oh, let's just wait 3 minutes. Let's just wait like 3, 4 minutes till I've just got enough room to now shovel that last bit in my mouth. I ate food I didn't like. I remember once getting a takeaway and it turned up and it was late. So first of all, I was furious at the delivery driver. He was going to get a swung if he was going to get a punch to the left hook at some point. I was so angry it was late. But when it turned up, it was cold, it was soggy, it was disgusting, and I ate all of it. I absolutely ate the whole lot, and that powerlessness suddenly kind of became really clear because I couldn't lie myself out of it. I couldn't think of a reason. Just, I could think of buy these cookies for the office. What was the lie I could tell myself of keep eating this until you feel so physically uncomfortable you can barely lie down? Like, what lie can I tell myself on that? That it just became so bonkers and so irrational that I couldn't be in denial that this isn't a weight problem, this is a food problem. And that kind of slow dawning happened in early 2018. And I'll be honest, the entirety of 2018 is actually a bit of a blur for me. I don't really remember it. I came into program in July 2018, and the first half of the year in pre OA, I was so mad. I don't really remember huge chunks of it. I don't. And then I started working with a sponsor, and I became abstinent the 12th of the 12th in a 2018. So yeah, just that those early days of recovery, being in OA but not working the steps, not with a sponsor, recognizing that food was the problem, but not really having the tools yet to do anything about it. All of that period of my life, I can actually barely remember it. It's so, yeah, the food had such a grip on me. And I came into OA and I was 180 kilos, which is about 28 and a bit stone. I think it's about 400 pounds. And I was on my knees. I didn't really realize just how on my knees I was until I then started working the steps. And I started looking at step one and that kind of admitting I was powerless over food. That kind of was okay. I think by that point I'd kind of understood it. But to be able to admit that my life was unmanageable, that was really hard actually. It took me a while. I was like, no, I'm fine. I've got a job and yeah, I've got a flat, I'm paying my rent on time, I'm never late and just kind of stuff like I'm all right, I'm okay. And then when I started working that step one and I worked a really solid step one, it became really clear like, oh no, my life is totally hanging on by a thread. That denial I have around food is exactly the same denial I have with all the other areas of my life. Like, I am in denial about the relationships I have with people. I am in denial about my health and my body. I am in denial about how I'm behaving. There was all kinds of stuff I was in denial about. And yeah, coming into OA and those first sort of few months where I was coming to meetings, I bought the literature and I'd done everything apart from get a sponsor and started working the steps. That was painful. That was painful because the denial was gone by that point. I was coming into meetings and I was hearing my story being told in everybody else, but I was still in the food. And actually, I think it got worse during that time because it was like that every strip of denial was so far gone that I just had to be kind of confronted with the raw pain of my illness and to the level I'd got to. Um, so I found a sponsor. Me and my sponsor still debate who asked who. I maintain she offered. She does not believe that. My recollection is that she had step 12 me in numerous ways, and she'd reached out to me, and we'd developed a kind of relationship. And then in a meeting one day, I said, I think I'm ready for a sponsor. And she came up to me and said, I'm available. And yeah,
That's
and
10
we,
minutes, Hannah.
thank you, acknowledged. And yeah, so we carried on working together. And actually, it's the same sponsor I've had this whole time. So I've been in program just over 5 years. I have been abstinent just over 5 years. And I've worked with the same sponsor that whole time. She took me through the steps. And yeah, what I didn't realize until more recently, and actually since I now am a sponsor and I sponsor people, I didn't realize just how quick my spiritual experience was. I know that, there's that kind of the Bill W type of spiritual experience, and there's the Dr. Bob type. And I had a Bill W type. It was quite quick, actually. I think, yeah, I came to my very first meeting and I couldn't open my mouth. I couldn't say anything. I just sat there and cried, and I didn't understand what was happening. I couldn't point out who was in that meeting now if you put them in a room. I don't remember. Um, but I just remember that feeling of, this is it. This is where I belong. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. And I now know that feeling to be God. And I trust now that if I feel emotional and I feel like I'm going to cry and I don't know why, that is my higher power. And I felt that at my very first OA meeting. Um, and yeah, and I think that's still the best definition I've got of my higher power, is that feeling. Um, when I did my step 2, I spent a lot of time in my head trying to figure out what God is, who is God, how do I find God. I was really conceptualizing it. And my sponsor very wisely said to me, well, when you figure it out, let us all know, because there's about 6 billion people that would like to know your answer. The idea that I could figure it all out on my own uh, makes me laugh now. So actually, my sponsor said, well, why don't you write down some beliefs you have about God, or about your higher power, or about spirituality, or about religion, that would be useful for you to get rid of. And the very first thing I put on the list was that I can define God. And I've had to let go of that. In order to work this program, I've had to just go, I don't know what God is. I'm just going to act as if. I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. And kind of following that scientific theory of testing it, seeing the results, that's what I've done. And I've consistently seen results. I've consistently, done a step 3. I do a step 3 prayer every morning, and consistently my higher power has shown up. I can't explain it. I don't know what it is, but it's there. And for me, the big shift was recognizing that I can't think God, I need to feel God. And in the food, I always thought my emotions. I didn't actually feel them. I was using the food so much that I was numb to everything. I didn't actually feel sad, happy, joy, excitement, nervousness. I didn't feel any of it. I was just numb to everything. I just thought it, and I didn't allow it to be an experience in my body. So putting the food down and actually learning what an emotion really feels like, not what I think it should feel like, meant that I was able to then connect with God. I had to put the food down. Um, and so I think that for me is also something I really sort of suggest to my sponsees, is that, yeah, you can absolutely have a spiritual experience, at any point in this program, from the start right the way through to, 10, 11, 12. But for me, I had to put the food down and be awake to emotions in order to feel God. I don't think I could have had the spiritual experience I had if I was still in the food. I don't, but for me personally, I don't think it would have been possible. And I think my abstinence allowed that kind of channel to be open to me, for me to be receptive to God. Um, and yeah, I'm so grateful that was it. And those early days, I was still mad all the way up to, I think, arguably today, I'm still mad. But those first few steps, there was definitely an element of white knuckle abstinence for sure. And then it kind of got to a certain point where I was like, oh yeah, I'm just not white knuckling it anymore. And for me, recovery often feels like it's like when you're walking up a really steep hill and you're walking up and it's so steep that actually you're looking right at the floor in front of you and you're just looking at each step right in front of you, right? You're not looking all the way up the hill because it's too steep and you're not, so you're just focusing what is that next foot forward, just that. And so every now and again in recovery, I need to stop and lift my head up and actually look at how far I've gone, look at how what the journey has been, and look at just how much I've achieved. Because otherwise, I won't notice it, I won't spot it. And I think so much of my recovery has been a kind of, oh, wait a minute, 6 months ago, I would have responded to this situation totally differently. Or 6 weeks ago, I would have responded to this situation totally differently. Um, and so for me, it is really important to have those moments to kind of check in and go, oh, yeah, no, I'm doing it. I am doing it. I go back to then walking up that steep hill. And then at different points of my journey and at different points of my recovery, it's not steep anymore. And it's like, oh yeah, this is just a bit more manageable now. And it I often find that I've noticed the recovery after it's happened rather than while I'm in it. Um, and so yeah, so it's important then again, what's why it's really helpful to have a sponsor who can be that kind of mirror and go, 6 weeks ago you were asking me about this. What's going on? I'm like, oh yeah, that's not an issue anymore. Um, so yeah, that's one of the real gifts of recovery. Um, but back to sort of working the steps. I sort of did my 4 through 9, and for any newcomers here, I always sort of define the steps as kind of steps 1 through 3 as being your kind of foundation. It's what you build everything on. 4 through 9 are then your action steps, the real kind of like building the house on it. And then 10, 11, 12 being your maintenance, how you keep it up and how you keep it standing. And so 4 through 9 for me was definitely a big gear change. It was like, oh my gosh, this is all of a sudden a lot of work. Um, Step 4, I definitely messed about. I was taking far longer than I needed to. My sponsor very wisely gave me a bit of a kick up the butt at one point and said, do you want this? Because it sounds like you don't want this anymore. And if that's the case, then maybe we should just part ways. I was like, oh, no, no, no. So I actually knuckled down and did it. Bit of a slog, but I think doing my step 5 was that first time I kind of just really felt like I was walking on a cloud. It was like that kind of oh, feeling, that big sigh, that kind of like the weight lifted off my shoulders. Um, and actually, I do steps 4 through 9 every year now, and I just did another step 5 a few weeks ago, and I still feel that kind of feeling after I do them. The step 4 is hard and it's a slog sometimes, but the step 5 is definitely worth it. Um, and then 6 and 7, I do a step 7 prayer every morning. And actually, as part of my annual step 6 and 7, I take one character defect and I pray for that specifically. So that's where I'm at the moment, just trying to figure out what is a character defect of mine that makes sense for me to focus on this year and for me to include in my step 7 prayer every morning. And it's normally based on any patterns or trends that I've seen in my step 4 and 5. Um, but then I did for me, I would say the big turning point in my recovery was when I did step 8 and 9. Um, I love step 9, but it was the thing I was most afraid of. I didn't really know much about OA before I came here. I just kind of knew you all sat in a circle, you said your name, and at some point you said sorry to everyone. That's kind of all I really knew. So the idea of going around and saying sorry was terrifying. Um, but, actually, each and every one of them was a spiritual experience unlike I've ever had before. And I remember at one point being stood in my bedroom in the middle of step 9 and just being like, oh, I don't ever want to forget this feeling. I don't ever want to forget this feeling of doing this. This feels amazing. And, I did some really beautiful never amends in particular. The one I always talk about is the one to my granddad. Um, the
20
the
minutes,
amend
Hannah.
Thank you. the amends were so healing, and they massively, restored so many of the relationships in my life. Um, and it was for me that step nine, certain things just kind of shifted. Like there were certain things where I kind of felt I was holding on. But in step nine, it all just kind of clicked into gear. Like I remember one day being like, I really need to clear up my room. Like my bedroom's just like a real mess and there's loads of stuff everywhere. Like I'm going to clear it up. And 4 and a bit years later, it's still clear. Like I've just kept that up. And it was in step nine, it was like, I think I want to like look after my body more. And I think I want to go to the gym actually. I think I want to start exercising. And I did. And the reason I'm a bit flustered and all the rest of it is because I came back from the gym this evening. I now work with a personal trainer. Um, and it was things like keeping, and actually it was in step nine, now I think of it, where I realized that I really need to start looking after my teeth. I hadn't been to the dentist in years. I had all sorts of problems. It's like, I need to bite the bullet and I need to go and sort my teeth out. And that has been a journey. I have had all my wisdom teeth removed in program. I have had fillings and I can count. I have had, I think, two crowns, maybe one or two. I had a failed attempt at a crown. And the most recent one is that I am due to get braces. So I'm going to be starting that process in a couple of months. I have spent a lot of time and a lot of money on my teeth because I completely neglected them in my illness. Um, but I don't do that anymore. I look after my teeth and I floss every single evening. And actually, flossing my teeth has now become a bit of a sign of my program. I'm getting to the end of the day and I don't want to floss. I'm like, what's going on? What resentment am I not dealing with here? Like, if I don't want to look after myself, I don't want to invest in my physical well being in something as small and basic as flossing my teeth, then something's going on here. Um, and so then, yeah, in terms of then working my 10, 11, 12, just continuing to grow, continuing to learn in this program and continuing to hold myself accountable and work with others as best I can. Um, so actually, I said I was going to talk about physical, emotional, and spiritual recovery. And what I would say, the main takeaway I have for that is that I had to focus on the emotional and the spiritual and allow the physical to do its own thing. The physical came when I wasn't looking at it. All the while, I kind of try and look at it and focus on it, is when my physical recovery slowed right down. If at any point I was becoming obsessed about my weight or obsessed about a number on a scale or anything like that, it slowed way down. And as soon as I stopped paying attention, stopped having it be the focus, and focused on my emotional and spiritual sobriety, it carried on going. And I have now lost, oh gosh, I think it's about 85 kilos. So that's about 12 and a bit stone, I think, about 170 pounds. I'm almost half the person I was. Um, and that has not been easy, actually. Weirdly, wanting to lose weight was the number one thing I wanted. I was also really scared of it. I was really scared of having lots of loose skin. Spoiler alert, I do have lots of loose skin. It's not that bad. I was really worried about the extra attention it would give me. I was worried about having to buy multiple wardrobes, and yeah, and all of those things did happen, and I was able to get through them all. I must admit, the attention was the one that I struggled with the most, without a shadow of a doubt. I remember, like I said, my absence date is the 12th of the 12th, and so I became absent right before Christmas, which in itself I could probably spend a whole 30 minutes talking about. But I remember then my second Christmas, so I just celebrated a year's absence and I'd lost quite a bit of weight. And I'd gone back to Hampshire to visit family. And I remember thinking, there's some people there who I hadn't seen since last Christmas. And I remember thinking, I don't think anyone's going to mention it. No one's going to mention I've lost weight. It's not going to be a topic of conversation. It'll be fine. I was like, I can do this. I can do this. I walked into the room And my uncle from across the room went, "Hi, skinny." Like, great. So guess what the topic of conversation was that Christmas? My weight loss. They didn't know I was in OA. Some of them still don't know. Some of them do know. But actually just feeling like I'm being looked at, like I'm being watched, like I'm being seen was really uncomfortable. My body really kind of desexualized me, and it really kind of was a barrier, and it just kind of anonymized me. It's like, you don't see me, you see my body. And to have that literally strip away felt super vulnerable. And I found that really hard, and it's been a learning curve. And what I have found is that because my weight loss is significant, I am a 100 pounder, I'm nearly a 200 pounder, that actually the people who are really interested in that, the people who ask me lots of questions, the people who want to know a lot more, are either doing so from a place of love, or they're doing so because actually they probably belong in this program. And actually, it's a way that I can be of service to people, is to talk about my physical recovery, out there in the world. And in the big book, and it talks about working with others. It's an approach that isn't necessarily done all that much in a way. That idea of kind of going out and finding people at the hospital and that kind of thing isn't really something I see being done. But actually just talking about my weight loss and talking about it, not even necessarily saying the words OA, but just saying enough so that if there is somebody out there who's maybe interested, they can come and ask more. So, I often say, people say, "Oh, how did you do it? How did you do it? How did you do it?" And my answer is always the same. It's like, I focused on my mental health. And I say nothing more than that. And actually, that is something that then gets people coming back and talking to me in a way I can be of service, in a way I can spread the message. But actually, something that I do is I am very specific in spreading the message when it comes to medical professionals. I tell my GP, I tell every doctor I ever speak to, I tell everyone in the NHS who will listen that this is how I lost the weight. And it's always interesting to see the response. But linked into that, in terms of my physical recovery, despite the fact that I'd lost the weight, despite the fact that I look after myself unlike I ever did before, I have never had worse health. I came into recovery and I have had nothing but, health diagnosis after health diagnosis, whether that's all the stuff with my teeth, or all kinds of other things. The main thing is that I have been diagnosed with early onset menopause. So I'm 34 and I don't have children. But yeah, that is now part of my journey. That's part of my story. Sometimes I am a raging bag of hormones. It's part of the deal now. But yeah, to be able to navigate all of that without turning to food, to be able to navigate that with my higher power, and to recognize that physical recovery is just showing up for my body. It's, doing my investigations on HRT. Is that an option for me? Do I want to postpone? Do I want to start now? To be able to go to appointments, to advocate for myself and say, "Hey, you cancelled my appointment, but you didn't book me another one, please." To do all of that is also what I consider to be physical recovery. The flossing of my teeth, recognizing that because of my menopause, I'm at higher risk of osteoporosis. So I now work with a personal trainer and I do strength training. Like all of this kind of stuff, that is physical recovery. But also, I recognize that physical recovery is allowing myself to experience joy, like physical joy. I hug people and I physically embrace them, and I'm not awkward about, them feeling my body. That is physical recovery. I buy clothes, that I enjoy and that I like and that fit me. That wasn't something I did pre-recovery. I used to wear the same like 2, 3 dresses in the same style from the same shop that I wore in rotation, and literally I wore them until they were falling off my body, because I didn't want to invest in myself. I didn't want to do that kind of thing. That for me is also physical recovery. But again, even today, 5 years in, if I get caught up in that, if I get swept up in that, if I start focusing on that, I can feel the emotional and the spiritual slip. Like it has to be something that I allow to work on its own. And if I invest too much in it and I spend too much time on it, if I think about it too much, if I chase it, I'll lose it. And, to just allow it to kind of tick along in the background and recognize that the action for me is on the emotional and the spiritual. I have to
30
make
minutes,
sure that
Hannah.
oh, thank you. I'll just wrap up. Um, I have to focus my day at the start of the day being on God. The first words out of my lips have to be, thank you, God. It has to be starting there and it has to be ending there. I bookend my day with God and I try my best to weave God throughout the rest of my day. That has to be it. And I realized someone the other day in a meeting, they talked about how the food was kind of inconsequential when they were in the food. It was like they said it was like washing their hands. It was just a thing that they did throughout the whole day. It was just how they were. And that absolutely really related to me. But what I love is that now that is God. God is inconsequential to me. It is woven, she, it is woven into my day and just is now. And I actually don't think I could stop using program if I wanted to. Like so much of this program is just ingrained into how I live my life that there's no other way I could live right now. I can't see it. So that does mean, unfortunately, I'm sticking around. You are going to have to experience me for a bit longer, I'm afraid. Um, but yeah, thank you again for having me here. I hope I've been of service to at least some of you. And yeah, thanks very much for having me. I'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Hannah. We will now open the Q&A section of our meeting, which will also be recorded. Please post your questions only in the chat function directly to me, and I will ask the question on your behalf. Okay, hold on. Let me just open my chat window. Okay, first question. So it says, thanks for the great share. What is a never amends?
Yes. So there's a few different ways that I know people do their step 9. So for me, there were well, let's waffle, Hannah. A never amends is an amends where I could not make the amends to the person directly, either because it was physically not possible or because doing so would be harmful to them or somebody else. Um, so one of the never amends I did was to my grandfather. And I did that because he was a very sick man. And I actually thought that in checking in with my sponsor, we kind of agreed that doing that amends to him in person wasn't right for him. He was becoming more and more confused in his older age. It just wouldn't have felt right. So instead of doing the amends directly to him, I went to a location that felt like a location that meant something to the two of us, and I did it with my higher power instead. I've done never amends to people who I could not physically find. Um, like there was someone who I knew at university who blocked me on everything. It was very clear she did not want to speak to me. Um, so actually doing an amends directly to her would probably not have been a good thing either. So I actually went back to our old university and I did it there instead. Um, and just because it wasn't in front of the person who I had harmed does not mean it was not exceptionally powerful. I did it in the presence of God. Um, and yeah, the one I did to my uni friend in particular, my higher power showed up in very funny ways. But yeah, so they're definitely not a lesser amends. And yeah, and they were certainly really powerful for me.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Thanks, Hannah, for an amazing share. Have you had any issues that have been more challenging to work the program on, and how did you deal with them?
I would say the most challenging part of my program, and it's one that I still struggle with at times today, is living in fantasy. And I think this is a hangover from being in denial for so long. It's that the reality sometimes of being a compulsive eater is really painful. And the fantasy of believing I'm somewhere else, doing something else, living a different life is really alluring. And that can be mild fantasy of scrolling through Instagram, believing that, oh, wouldn't it be lovely if I had a house that looked like that? Or it could be, binge watching a series on Netflix and, oh gosh, if I lived in a fantasy world with dragons and blah, 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 how would I behave? Like, all that kind of nonsense. Or it could be more sinister in the fact that I have to be careful when it comes to things like playing the lottery, because I can start fantasizing about winning, and then all of a sudden I'm doing something a bit compulsive. It can cause me to procrastinate at work, and then I don't actually get my work done. Um, so that is something that has been hard. And so for me, the response to that fantasy is to first of all inventory it. Why am I fantasizing? What is it about my current life and my current situation that's so hard? Um, I can then remedy that with a lot of step 11 and also a lot of gratitude to recognize that what I do have is so much, and being of service really helps. Calling a newcomer, coming and sharing my story, reminding myself of just how much better my life is. I don't have to have won the lottery. I don't have to be in a relationship with someone from a Marvel superhero franchise. I can just be as I am, and that's enough. And that's enough. And I can surrender the rest to God. And fantasy for me, normally when I inventory it, it comes for a feeling of unsafe. I feel unsafe as I am. I don't have enough money. I don't look good enough. Fantasizing that I might look a certain way, or that, all of that, like, it comes from a feeling of being unsafe. And so that's when my step 11 comes in, to recognize that my higher power has my back. My life might not go the way I want it to, but it will always go the way that it needs to. It will go my higher power's way. And that is the right way for me. And to continue working on my step 11 and to develop and deepen that relationship to the best of my ability.
Okay, next. Thank you for your great share. How do you connect with your higher power in the morning and evening? What is your routine?
So routine. My routine has had to grow and evolve, especially over the last few months, actually, because I have started taking HRT. And one of the side effects I've had of HRT is that while I am now sleeping better, I do wake up in the morning and feel like I've been hit by a bus. So my morning routine has had to adapt. Um, so what I often say is I have my kind of skeleton routine, and then over the years I have added to it, built on it, flexed on it, and it has adapted to suit wherever I'm at that point in my life. As a minimum, I will wake up and I will do a meditation. Very first thing. I use an app, and actually I won't name it because it's an outside issue, but it has an independent person has done their own step 11 meditation on it, and they read upon awakening at the beginning of the meditation. They read it aloud, and then they kind of do a guided meditation. So I start there. I then do a step 1, 2, 3 prayer. And by that, I just remember, I say, God, I am a compulsive overeater. Please don't let me forget that. Please don't let me become complacent with my recovery. Please remind me of where I was. And please remind me that I cannot do this on my own. I cannot do this on self-will. I have to do this with a fellowship of other people, and I have to do this with you. And I will make up and I will say what I need to hear and what I need to be reminded of that morning. I have a little notebook where occasionally I write some things down as just like some prompts for what that prayer might need to be. I will pray for other people. I will always pray for the people I'm resentful at first. Then I will pray for everyone else. And then I do the step 3 prayer from the Big Book and the step 7 prayer from the Big Book as well. And then in the evening, I will do my inventory. I will sort of run things through the columns. I will kind of do that. And then I have a kind of little written run through that I do. I write a little bit about my food that day. How was my food? Is there anything going on? How are my portions? How was the timing for things? Just a little reflection on that, couple of sentences. I write down 10 things I'm grateful for. 3 things that I did that day that I'm proud of, and where I saw God that day. How did I see God in what I was doing? I then write down any issues I maybe have, maybe anything that maybe I forgot to inventory, anything going on, maybe anything that I need to keep an eye on, maybe any patterns that I'm seeing. I then do, sound like I do a lot actually. I then do hungry, angry, lonely, tired, halt. And I give each of those a score out of 5. And every now and again, I need to add an extra H, which is hormonal. And I will give that a score. And actually, that's really helpful to then look back. And then if I'm looking at the issues and the food and things I'm grateful for and all the rest of it, I'm like, hang on a minute, I gave myself a 4 out of 5 on angry. Yeah, no wonder I struggled to think of things that I was grateful for today. Okay, so I give myself that score. I then write down the tools and I do a tick cross. Which tools did I use today? I'm like, oh, hang on a minute. I only used 3 tools today. No wonder I felt lonely. I didn't call anyone. I didn't go to a meeting. I didn't do anything. Again, nice little reflection on sometimes these scores and the things I've already written. And then and then I do a little tick cross on prayer and meditation. Did I pray or meditate throughout the day? I know I started my day that way, but did I do it throughout the day? Was I proactive? When I had a moment in that meeting earlier, did I pray and then talk to my boss calmly, or did I just feel and then wait until it got really bad before I did anything? And then I end with, what can I do better tomorrow, and how can I be of service tomorrow? So looking forward after that. And then I take one last prayer and I thank God for my day and I head to bed. So that's kind of how I bookend the day.
Right, next question. Thank you so much, Hannah, for speaking. May I please ask you about how you dealt with the vulnerability that came with being seen in your body in a new way, probably also sexually after losing weight? This is something that scares me.
Yeah, vulnerability. It's a bugger, isn't it? And it's annoying that it's the essential part of human connection, isn't it? The more vulnerable I am, the way that's how I connect. And actually, I think being in meetings has really helped me be vulnerable in that respect, because I'm more vulnerable in these meetings with strangers whose surnames I don't know than I am with some people in my life. And that honesty really helps. And it helps me to be brave. The braver I am in these meetings, which are a really safe and secure place where I'm held and where you guys aren't going to kick me out because I don't look a certain way, helps me to go out there and navigate the big wide world. So that's one thing. And so to be really vulnerable and honest in these meetings does help with that. It can sometimes be a hindrance though, because I can sometimes then forget I'm not at work and then start talking really openly and honestly like I do here, and everyone kind of looks at me like, oh my gosh. It's like, oh yeah, no, I'm not face anymore, Hannah, keep it quiet. But in terms of then body, that is a learning curve, because one of the things, and I hate to say it, is that in certain ways I was proved right, in the fact that my worst fear was that people treat me better just because I'm skinnier. And guess what? People treat me better because I'm skinnier. And it's painful. And the fact, but that has been my experience. People don't avoid sitting next to me on the bus anymore. I have a better relationship with my dad in partly, I think, because he always used to say to me, you'd be so pretty if you lost weight. And I always thought he would like me more and be prouder of me if I lost weight. And I think he is prouder of me, and I think he does like me more now I've lost weight. And that is painful too. And I think to be able to accept the sicknesses out there in the world, to pray for them, to pray for people like my dad, uh, to be able to recognize that I am so lucky to have a program that means I can navigate all of that and not take their inventory. I don't have to deal with their sickness and I can just do my part. And if other people want to judge me on my body, then go ahead. It isn't important to me. And actually, funnily enough, this is the thing I'm looking at now in terms of what I want to put as my step seven character defect for the year. I think last year it was mostly about comparing myself to others, and I don't do that anymore. I don't compare myself to others. I prayed on it for probably about 6 months, and then ended up taking that off. It's like I don't care anymore. Other people can be other ways, but I often have a preconceived idea that everyone else is all one homogenized mass of people, and I am on the outside looking in. And actually, they all believe one thing. They all think I'm shit. They all get together clearly and all discuss how crap I am at everything and everyone. And, I'm not worthy of them. And actually, there is something about me being able to treat people as individuals, the individuals that they are, and recognize that they aren't one homogenized mass that think a certain way, that actually they're all individuals too, with their own issues, with their own sicknesses, with their own hang ups, with their own insecurities. And maybe I can just treat them as they are. Um, and then the last thing, so, in terms of being able to see their vulnerabilities, I suppose, as well, it makes it easier for me to recognize mine amongst them. And in terms of the sexuality stuff, I'm going to have to pass on that one. I'm afraid that is still very much an active work in progress. Um, it is something that I have spoken to my sponsor about, and I think it might be one of the few areas that I will seek outside help on in the form of therapy or counselling. I've not done that before. But it's one of the biggest areas, and I think it's probably one of the last big hurdles in my program. The belief where I'm at the moment is I'm totally fine with my body. I really am comfortable, and my body is my home. It is not some house I squat in. It is my home, and I treat it that way. Where I'm at currently is I sometimes struggle to believe that somebody else could love it or like it the way that I love it and like it. And there is a fear around that still. And yeah, and I think part of then why that might be my step 7 character defect for the year is to get to a point where maybe, just maybe, I can believe that somebody else might not just tolerate me, but actually might even find me attractive. Who knows? So I might have to come back to you on that one, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Okay, this is our last question before we wrap up. Do you encourage your sponsees to repeat their inventory yearly? Also, have you found this practice of like a yearly 4th and 5th step useful?
Massively, absolutely massively. And so, yeah, any sponsee, as a straight off the bat, when it comes to me working with sponsees, I can only do what I have been shown. If I start playing around with the program and doing something other than what my sponsor showed me, then I'm working Hannah Anonymous, and no one gets well on Hannah Anonymous, right? Do not recommend Hannah Anonymous, right? I can only do what I have been shown, no other way. So if I did it, the sponsee is going to do it. That's bottom line on that one. And in terms of repeating it, absolutely. So the first time I did it, it was kind of like, so it would have been what, 2019. So it was my entire life of inventory up until 2019. And then when I did it in 2020, it was just a year. It's just, what is there anything that's happened over this past year that you've kind of holding on to that, and yeah, there anything that still needs working through. And one of the things that I love is that I now can see patterns and trends over the years. I've done them enough. Um, far, far less people in my inventory. I think I see people differently. I recognize like it's not who they are. It's not, in my first column isn't my mom. It's the fact that my mom treats me more like a sister than a daughter. right? It's not her. I'm not angry at her. It's not a resentment at her. What it is more is it's a disturbance on the dynamic that we have, and actually I go deeper. Um, each time I've done a fourth and final, I've gone deeper in different ways, and something new has emerged, and new patterns and trends in my life have come up. And I remember once sometimes saying it's sometimes working all of the steps feels like you're going in a circle because you're doing the same things over and over. And like I've worked all the steps now, like I'm doing the same stuff. And then someone said, actually, bizarrely, my mum said, no, spiritual growth isn't about going in a circle, it's about being a downward spiral. So actually, it might feel like you're going in a circle, but because you're going down each time and there's a new level of depth, you're getting something new each time. So it's not actually spinning in a circle. It just might feel like that sometimes. But yeah, I would personally, really recommend continuing to do that proactively. Because also, how could it hurt?
Thanks so much, Hannah. Um, Q&A has now come to a close. Thank you again, Hannah, for being our guest speaker, for your service, time, and energy.